What are some of your favorite commercials?
The AMC Wells Rich and Green commercials are some of the best, simply because they were one of the first car companies to incorporate humor into the messages that they were trying to communicate. Herb Edelman was the bald guy who drove the Javelin in that spot, and everybody was trying to drag race him. And there were a lot of actors like that. There's an actor named Dana Elcar, who was in the introductory Gremlin commercial. And so they used a lot of talent that was up and coming in Hollywood.
The Last Independent Automaker Podcast was sponsored in part by Visit Detroit, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Motor City's National Heritage Area, and by the over 375 individuals and organizations who donated to this project. Thank you.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us again on the Last Independent Automaker Podcast. Today's episode is going to be a fun one because we're talking about how we got some of that great vintage footage you see in our documentary. You know, aside from the great stories from all the folks we interviewed, I get a lot of compliments, a lot of comments on YouTube, how much people love the vintage car ads, the old TV commercials, the factory footage. And a lot of that material came from our first guest, my friend Todd Ruel, who specializes in tracking down and preserving historical automotive films. So thanks for joining us today, Todd.
Joe, it's a pleasure to be on. Thanks for inviting me.
So let's just jump right into it. I mean, if people are watching our documentary, they'll probably recognize stuff like at least the first 5 episodes have material from you. Everything from early Nash Rambler commercials to, Gremlin commercials, Pacer commercials, Javelin commercials, lots of cool factory footage of the 74 Hornets and Gremlins being built. How did you amass this awesome collection?
It started with basically, I love classic cars. My background is in television production. So there's kind of an intersection between a love of pop culture, a love of history, and a love of classic cars. So I really like the messages, the media that car companies create. And I got interested in American Motors because I got into all this through the Metropolitan, my friends. I have a Metropolitan, 61 Metropolitan sitting in storage. And I began to wonder, what media did these car companies create to help promote these products? And I don't know how I saw this, but out there in the world somewhere was some vintage Metropolitan footage shot in 1953 or 1954. And I became fascinated with it. And I tracked down John Conde, who was the assistant to the director of public relations for Nash and American Motors, and later the director of public relations for Jeep, before he retired in 1976. And he was selling a huge collection of literature and films at Hershey and other events every year, but he was kind of getting up there, and he knew that at some point he had to retire. So I went to his home and bought his entire film collection. Now, it was not huge, but a lot of the stuff in it was significant. And from there, I started getting onto eBay early in the late 90s. And whenever this stuff would pop up, I would bid on it. At first, I specialized in orphan cars. So Nash, Studebaker, Kaiser Frazer. I have the world's largest gram page film collection, 5 films. And, the collection just grew from there, and I expanded out after that. I realized I can't just stay with orphan cars. So I started collecting car films from the rest of the manufacturers as well.
When you talk about film, what is the actual stuff? That's not the same thing as tape. These are like canisters of celluloid.
Oh,
Right?
yeah.
It's like, you can hold it up and see through it kind of thing.
So I have an example of 16 millimeter film here. This is a Wells Rich and Green film from about 1971. And they would distribute commercials like these to the TV stations. The TV stations would put them up on projectors, and those projectors, they would have TV cameras filming those projectors, and that's how they would show the TV commercials. These are the days before videotape was widespread.
Yeah.
So they would have these film chains with cameras connected up to projectors, TV screens. That's how they would show these commercials.
Yeah, and so it's fascinating. So say, we mentioned our documentary, Wells Rich Green, the ad firm, they produce these commercials for the Javelin, AMX, whatever. So they would put that they'd film that commercial, then they'd put it on little films, make probably hundreds of copies, and then mail them
Yes.
out to TV stations or
Yeah.
whatever. So these films that you collect off eBay or at swap meets or whoever, are these by chance films that were distributed to a TV station and just somehow didn't get thrown in the garbage? I mean, how did these things get saved?
That is the eternal mystery. I get films. I bought a film that was a retirement gift to a GM executive a couple of years ago, and I haven't watched it. But this thing has to be a one-off because they probably projected it at his retirement dinner, and then that was the only print, and they probably gave it to him. He probably died, and whoever took over his estate, maybe the family wasn't interested in it, that it didn't resonate with them in any way. So they gave it to the auctioneer, or somehow it ended up in an auctioneer's hands. And guess what? That auctioneer auctions it off on eBay. I've gotten weird stuff from all over the United States, and I can't really track it, but I suspect that's why it ends up on eBay. It doesn't resonate with the family. An auctioneer has it, doesn't resonate with them. They're just out for the money. And so they put it up for sale. And so I can't really say, hey, there's one source for all this. Back in the day, you could have said, okay, the source would have been the dumpsters right after AMC announced that it was being bought out by Chrysler. And indeed, a lot of dumpster diving did happen with documents and probably films, etc. But, that's how I acquire most of this stuff. It ends up in the hands of auctioneers after the people who owned it died. And if I'm the highest bidder, it ends up in my hands.
And then it's not just the matter of acquiring the stuff, but then there's the whole process of digitizing it, getting it into a computer or into a format that can be, watched by people. Explain that process for us, because that's really a fascinating thing. The business of, taking these films, because you're not just watching them on a projector, you want to be able to preserve them. So what's that like? You get a film, what do you do next?
Joe, I'm glad you mentioned that because these films were not meant to last. So when the film prints were struck, they were meant to last maybe for 6 months, 12 months. And after that, everybody knew you would just throw them out. So what happened to them? Because they were printed cheaply, because they weren't meant to last, the dyes in the films would fade over time. So you have these warm prints. And what that means is the film prints are made of about three different dyes: magenta, cyan, and yellow. And what happens is the cyan and the yellow dyes would fade very quickly, and you'd end up with red film. So when you looked at the film print, if you held it up, to the light, the film print would be what we call very warm or very red. So what I have to do is when I put it on the film machine that you see behind me, I have to do dye fade correction, which means pump up the cyan and the yellow and decrease the red a little bit to try to get the colors balanced again so that they're the way you expect them, you expect to see them, rather than the way they are now. It's kind of like restoring a faded photograph that's ripped. That's what I'm doing with film. In addition, we have software that does restoration, like a little bit of technical term, dust busting. So if the film has speckles, vertical lines in it from being projected too much, we go in and we try to correct or reduce those greatly so the viewer gets an enjoyable experience. Now, a lot of my clients who license film, they kind of expect that old film look to a degree, but sometimes the prints I get are rough. And no matter what, we have to go in there and try and fix them up so that they're presentable.
That was a challenge we faced with some of the clips we licensed from you. Was there was one particular clip, the javelin dance party clip, where you had digitized it earlier at a lower resolution and then redigitized it specially for us in 4K. And we flip-flopped a little bit because the older digitization, the colors were a little more true. The newer one was a little crisper, but the colors were a little red. And so we flip-flopped, and I ended up choosing the older version. I felt bad making you do the extra work, but I ended up choosing the older version because the colors were prettier in that version. But I'm sure you run into those kind of conundrums all the time.
Yeah, the film you're talking about, I had the only complete print of the 1969 AMC product dealer introduction film. I know that sounds like that's not much of a flex, really, to the world out there, but this film is incredibly. I mean, it's impossible to find. I knew it when I bought it 20 some years ago, and I had it transferred in SD, standard definition. We all now broadcast in HD, high definition. Back then, that film was a ruby red, warm print with enough of the original color in it so that we could digitize it. I stored it improperly. That's on me. I screwed up. And what happened was color continued to fade over time. So what I got now has even less color in it, but I'm sure that technology will advance to the degree where I can use that old transfer that I did as a reference and restore to a new 4K version.
And that's the thing is the technology changes. Even in the midst of this project, it took us so long to complete, from when we started to when we finished. Cameras got better, software got better, effects got better. And it was amazing to see how the technology changed. When we first came up with this idea, we thought we were big shots, filming everything in 4K resolution. And then now your iPhone can do that. So
Yes.
technology is always changing. But before we get too far along, I wanted to ask, what are some of your favorite films you've discovered? Like, and I don't mean necessarily that they were rare or that kind of thing, but just favorite to watch.
To answer this question, let me start by giving a shout out to Tom Thomas. Tom Thomas came from Ford, where he made like documentary and promotional films for them. And Bill McNeely, who was the vice president of marketing, brought him over and he started creating promotional films for American Motors. The 1969 one is my absolute favorite dealer introduction film of all time. It's exciting. It feels new. It feels very much a product of its time, but it feels fresh. There's a ton of energy to it. And I think what he was doing was really promoting lifestyle features, a lifestyle association with the cars, rather than just, hey, here's a new knob that does this, right? Focus on the benefit to the consumer rather than the features themselves. He was really a specialist at that. And I think he deserves as much credit as Wells Rich Green. Having said that, there are some other fun films. Basically, a lot of the muscle car stuff from the late 60s and early 70s is just a blast to watch because they're really appealing to the youth market.
Looks like another case of love at first sight.
And that's all it takes. One look, and you're with it. Dodge Charger, the perfect marriage of style and performance.
And I've been collecting a lot of that stuff these past several years, especially from Ford.
Okay, California, now you're gonna get it. Mustang GTCS, the California Special, inspired by the Shelby GT, with fog lamps, side scoops, and spoiler, all at a Mustang price. Mustang GTCS.
I really like collecting any of the industrial films. Anything from Nash just happens to be kind of like a guilty pleasure for me. The Studebaker film from 1964 called Different by Design is great. Fun viewing, introduces all of their cars, a real slice of life in the mid-60s-ish. And it was kind of like it was their last hurrah. They put a lot of money into it. And since Studebaker ceased U.S. production in, I think, December 1963, I doubt that film was shown that much. So prints of it are rare. I paid a fair amount of money for that. It was worth it. Great film.
Yeah, it's an absolutely beautiful film.
Here is another type of film. So here is a film that is what they called a news film. This is for AMC's Concept 80 program, which I think took place in 76 or 78. You correct me. You tell me.
It was the spring of 77, I want to say.
Okay. So what happened was another artifact that they put out besides commercials, besides longer industrial films, they would put out these news films, which would be B-roll that they would send to the local television station to act as filler for their newscasts if they couldn't fill their 30-minute newscast in a night. And so when you see these on eBay or on the internet, quite often they're silent because, and this is a bonus, if you end up buying one of these with the original script, and I have the original script here, okay, this is the cue sheet that the announcer is supposed to read along with the film. I don't know how successful these programs ever were, but they go from about 68 until the late 70s. So let's say roughly about 10 years. They're just fascinating looks that nobody ever thinks about because they're so used to seeing commercials and other types of media. But they are as valuable to me as the commercials and some of the industrial films.
That's a practice that still exists today. Of course, it's all digital, but organizations and automakers, whatever businesses, doesn't even have to be car related, will send a B-roll package to a news station. So the news station gets a cheap story to throw on the air and the business gets some free promotions. That's back then,
Absolutely.
that was just the analog way of doing what is now all done online.
Exactly right. And so when you find these films, they're about 60 seconds long at the most, because that's how long a news story would be on the local news. So they were packaging it for local TV stations.
Let's talk just a little bit more about commercials because that's really the thing people remember. I mean, commercials are meant to stick in your memory. What are some of your favorite commercials?
The AMC Wells Rich and Green commercials are some of the best, simply because they were one of the first car companies to incorporate humor into the messages that they were trying to communicate. Now, they weren't the first. I think Doyle Dane Bernbach created the Volkswagen commercials, and they really celebrated the anti-hipness, of the Volkswagen Beetle. They were the first company to really put down or insult in a gentle way the product that they were trying to sell. And so those Volkswagen commercials are fascinating because they're kind of like the anti-advertising advertising. Those are always fun to watch. I have several of those, and they're great. Some of the other commercials, I always love the commercials that have the announcer who's speaking like this from the 1950s.
It's the new star in the Rambler family, the all-new four-door Nash Rambler, styled by Pininfarina Farina. See all the 1954 Nash Air flights. Check the new low prices. See your Nash dealer.
It's always fun to spot early appearances by celebrities.
Yeah, I think within like 2 years, Wells Rich Green had a commercial with Richard Dreyfuss and Robert De Niro. Within like I think they might have both been 69 or 68 commercials.
That's exactly right.
Crazy, two big time celebrities who were probably at the time in their early 20s
Yeah.
or maybe even younger.
Yeah.
Both show up in AMC commercials.
Herb Edelman was the bald guy who drove the Javelin in that spot, and everybody was trying to drag race him. He was a character actor and a pretty well-known character actor at that time and even later. I think he played one of the boyfriends of the Golden Girls in the 1980s.
Then we built the Javelin.
Hello, mon ami. You wish to race with me?
No. Merci.
It can go from 0 to 60.
So you'd see him all over TV. And there were a lot of actors like that. There's an actor named Dana Elcar, who was in the Gremlin commercial, the introductory Gremlin commercial.
What is that? The Gremlin? Oh, move over. He's doing Wait a minute.
It's smaller than any other car made in America, which makes it easier to park and handle.
You like it? Hey! Wow, what's that? It's a Gremlin! Yeah, get in and drive it. Give it a try. It's my car! Wait!
And so they used a lot of talent that was up and coming in Hollywood and New York at that time.
One thing that's worth mentioning is that this isn't just a hobby for you. This is also a business. I mean, you collect and restore and license all kinds of historical footage that's been used in all kinds of productions, not just our documentary, right?
Yes, that's right. Some of this I do license through Getty Images, and they give me a royalty statement every month. And when I look at the royalty statement, I can see who has licensed it. So all of the major names of media companies you've ever heard of have licensed my stuff. So sometimes when American Pickers would license a Nash clip, I'd look at it and go, they must have found a Nash in a barn. CNN, NBC, Viacom, everybody.
It's cool that, you get to be a small part of preserving, part of American history through saving these films.
Yeah, it's kind of like I'm basically just a steward of these until the next person comes along, and I just hope I'm keeping them in decent enough condition that they'll be usable and a worthwhile thing to keep for whoever gets them next.
Well, Todd, I can't thank you enough for everything you contributed to our film, both the stuff you digitized explicitly for us per request, also the things that we were able to take from your library of, incredible footage I already knew you had because I'd seen it online and in other places. It really adds a lot to the story of American Motors. I think being able to hear the music, hear the actors, see the cars in motion, it just really brings the story to life. And I'm so grateful that you and some of our other friends along at the Kenosha History Center and other collectors were able to contribute this footage that really helps tell the story of American Motors. It's been an incredible blessing for our team to have that material to work with.
It takes a village, right? No person can do this on their own. And but somebody has to be that lead voice or that leader in rounding up all this stuff and putting it all together. And I think you did a great job doing that. So well done. Well done.
And our next two guests on the last Independent Automaker podcast are two guys who've been a huge part of this project. As a lot of our AMC friends know, American Motors was unique in that while their headquarters were in Detroit in the Motor City, their biggest manufacturing facilities were actually located in Kenosha, Wisconsin. And we are very fortunate as a team to connect with some great locals in the area. And that especially is the Kenosha History Center. So I'm here today with John and Chris, who were a big part of helping us get this documentary over the finish line. So thanks for joining me today, guys.
Very glad to be here. Thanks for having us, Joe.
It's a little hard to believe that, Chris, you and I first met, I think it was 2017. So 8 years ago. It's a little hard to believe that this project has taken 8 years to finish.
You can't rush greatness.
It's a little wild when I think back to that first summer. I think it was the same year as the Kenosha Homecoming Car Show. My co-producer Jim and I came to the show, but then also stayed around after to shoot a bunch of interviews in the Kenosha History Center. And I see you guys are actually in that space where you have different AMC cars on display. But you guys aren't just a car museum. I mean, what exactly is the Kenosha History Center? What all do you guys have?
Yeah, so the Kenosha County Historical Society operates the Kenosha History Center. We've been around since the year 1878. So there were some very forward thinkers at that point that put together our society here, and they started collecting local history. So really our scope of collections covers all of Kenosha County. And of course, American Motors, Nash, Jeffrey, the whole automotive manufacturing here in Kenosha is a big part of that. But we try to encompass all of Kenosha County history into our building and into our mission.
Yeah, and I think that's a cool thing about your museum. I'm not just a car guy. I like all history. At one point, AMC was the largest employer, but there was a lot of manufacturing that happened in the city, right?
Kenosha was a lot more than just automobiles. So we had, wire rope. There was a big tannery here. They were making fire trucks in town. There's brass, and the list goes on and on and on. Simmons bed mattresses. So this was a very blue collar town. We made a lot of stuff here in Kenosha.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great thing about the History Center is that, you guys preserve that stuff. And it made it a cool place for us. Our team shot our first interviews there in 2017, and we came back for 5 more years and shot interviews in 2018, and then I think again in 2022. And I have to say, it's always such a cool backdrop because you always have different cars on display because the vehicles there aren't all owned by the History Center. A lot of them are just private collectors that loan them out, right?
Yeah, we have a network of some phenomenal AMC people. As you've come to meet a lot of them over the years, we work with collectors from around the country, and every fall we typically change our automobile exhibit. So as I was driving in this morning, I was thinking about when we first met back in 2017 and some of the exhibits that we've had over the years. We did AMXs for the 50th anniversary of AMX. We did something for the red, white, and blue cars, which was so signature for AMC. After that, help me out, John.
Prototypes and one-offs. Then we had race cars most recently.
And now we just moved in station wagons this week. So it's going to be a fun year with showing off our station wagons now. It's a nice way to honor, Kenosha's automobile history here.
Yeah, I was counting the brands the other day, all of the brands that have been made in Kenosha. It's all through that line, the same family line, but you had Jeffrey, which then became Nash. Then Nash built a separate brand called Ajax. Then when Nash and Hudson merged, they built Hudson's in Kenosha, and then they built Ramblers in Kenosha, and then they built AMC's in Kenosha. And then, when Chrysler bought AMC, they built Chryslers in Kenosha. And so just that one factory has built, 6 different brands over the years. Not to mention, you mentioned that, fire engines were manufactured. That had nothing to do with AMC. That was a totally different company.
Besides AMC, there were other auto manufacturers here in town as well. There was the Winter Motor Truck Company, which also manufactured touring cars. They didn't last very long beyond World War I, but they were here for a while. Then there were two companies called, the first was called Petrol, and the second was called the Earl Motor Car Company, which is not the same as the other Earl Motor Car Company that was in Michigan. The Badger Brass Company, one of whose founders was the father of Orson Welles, Richard Welles, Orson Welles' father. They produced a one-off cycle car. And then we had a couple factories that produced one-off steam cars as well.
Like you said in the documentary, Chris, it's a motor city. It's not the motor city, but it's a motor city. A really great thing for our team was to be able to come to you, who are, kind of experts in the local history, and help connect us with other people that we could interview for the documentary. And so that was a really cool thing, to be able to shoot the interviews with these cars in the background and kind of get this history. And when we first met, I thought it was just going to be the interviews. But while we were here filming the interviews, we learned that you guys have an incredible archive of AMC related photos and videos. How did you guys acquire all that stuff for your archives?
Yeah, so the Kenosha History Center, it's our mission to collect, preserve, and then exhibit or make accessible things that pertain to Kenosha's history. So dating back, like I said, to 1878, and obviously cars weren't around back then. We weren't collecting AMC history, but they've always done a good job of collecting photographs and later on company history. So we're fortunate to have a collection of, tens of thousands of photographs relating to automobile history. And those date back into probably the late 1930s, early 1940s, all the way up until when AMC and Chrysler were closing up shop here. We had a few donations over the years. There was some that came, or a lot that came from a few people. And then more recently, UAW Local 72 recently sold their building and were moving to some smaller offices. We were able to go in and save, what was that, about 15,000 photos?
At least. Yeah, it's just such a large amount of photos that it's that just getting a grip on the size of the collection itself was difficult.
But we've had a lot of great photographers in Kenosha over the years, and we were able to get an IMLS grant dating back about 15 years now, and we were able to digitize a lot of that collection as well. So if you go onto our website, which I know you're very familiar with, you're able to search through those catalogs of old factory photographs, not just AFC, but all the other ones in town as well. And it's a treasure trove. I mean, we're looking at tens of thousands of photographs.
You guys had a lot of really cool stuff that maybe wasn't official company communications. They were personal photos, or they're photos from stories that were in a local newspaper or something like that. And so you have maybe the only copy of this image. You guys have stuff that's really kind of exclusive to Kenosha, which is really neat.
Yeah, and some of it was probably captured by people that worked there. Some of it may have been company stuff that somehow made its way out of the factory. So I know there's been some creative ways to get some items to us.
Sure. And so the photos are a great part of it. And I love, it's interesting. I love both the color and the black and white photos are so interesting. And I love looking at all of the faces in a picture and just seeing the huge variety of people who worked at that plant. There's men, there's women, there's young, there's old. It really paints a picture that American Motors was a big deal for a lot of people in Kenosha. It wasn't just a small slice of the population who was involved there.
Yeah, it gives me goosebumps a little bit. American Motors was intertwined into Kenosha's fabric. I think even to this day, when we have visitors that are, they've lived in Kenosha for multi-generations, their family has lived here for multiple generations. They come here, they visit the cars, they see the engines with the signatures on it, the last engines, And then we hear the stories of, oh, my father worked there, my grandfather, my aunt. It's just so interwoven. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find a family that's lived here for, let's say 40, 50 years, to find a family that wasn't impacted by the motors in some way. They had people working there, or maybe they worked for a different company in town, a different factory that provided parts for the motors or provided services for the motors. So yeah, it's part of Kenosha. It's still synonymous with Kenosha, and we haven't had a car roll off the line since 1988.
One thing, back to the photo archives, I really have to thank John in particular, because there was during our mad dash to finish the documentary, under our deadline to get it on to PBS, I would often be firing off emails to John being, do you have a photo of this? Do you have a photo of that? Do you have a picture of the factory in winter? Or do you have a picture of this person or that thing? And John was usually my main point of contact on that. And I wanted to ask John, how do you know the collection so well? You always seemed to be able to find what I was looking for.
Well, I've been working here for about 10 years now. I'm generally the person who answers research requests, and I do most of the research for exhibits, and I do most of our social media stuff we do. So you end up working with the collection so long, especially the photo collections, that you just start to know what you have. You might not know exactly where it is, but you remember that it's there.
I think he knows a lot of the people's names in them too, because he'll post it on Facebook, and then we have families in Kenosha that are, oh, that's my father, his name is this, and then he worked with so and so. So we're learning more and more as we post more photos online as well.
Yeah, I have to say, I have to give a huge shout out to your Facebook page. The posts you do, and not just the AMC posts, any of the posts about Kenosha are really fun to read. It's kind of the opposite of what, Facebook, you think it's just mindless garbage. You scrolling through all this slop. And then I come across one of your posts and I actually stop and read it because I know it's going to be good, whether it's about an AMC photo or a photo of a flood or a tornado or a photo of a building that used to be a building and then became this and then became that, or, the history of, who installed this fountain in the town square and that kind of stuff. It's so well researched and so fun to read. Even though I didn't grow up in Kenosha, I find it interesting.
Thank you very much. There's a saying that local is global, and that's something that I try to take to heart when I'm doing our social media especially.
You guys have a fascinating video archive as well. And a lot of it comes from something which I had no idea existed, but from about 1974 to about 1984, the Kenosha factory had its own closed circuit TV system. They had a very small team of people who made little news stories and features and advertisements and stuff, and would go around the plant and interview people, and they talk about, plant safety or whose birthday it was, or, Christmas parties or whatever was going on at the plant. And all of those tapes were miraculously saved and made it to you guys. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys acquired this incredible collection of video?
When it came in was a little before my time, but the individual who donated it was named Gilbert Ebner, who on the photo, he's on the end of the photo on your screen. He was a supervisor, and somehow he came into possession of all these tapes. We're not sure how. They didn't tell us how. Which is, we're not asking questions. They were donated to us along with some equipment. There's 2 large metal cabinets full of tapes, and it's a phenomenal resource.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible, just the amount of material. I mean, I tried to go through it as much of it as I could, and I probably only got like a quarter or halfway through it. There's videos from the assembly line, there's videos from training programs or, stockholders meetings and all kinds of stuff. Cause I guess the film team went back and forth from Kenosha to Detroit. So there's stuff shot in Detroit, a lot of stuff shot in Kenosha. It's really a fascinating collection. And we used a lot of that footage. Just a miracle that it was saved.
Yeah, it was it's a challenge. It was donated to us. We did not have the means or the resources to digitize that. So going back to when we met in 2017, I had this this light bulb moment. Oh, look, we have someone that's interested in making a documentary, and we have a wonderful resource here, but we don't have it to a point where we can use it or access it. So, we were able to strike up a conversation and later a deal to have those, somewhat digitized through you and for you to use them in the documentary. And then it's going to benefit generations to come to have access to that material. So it's been a wonderful partnership over the years with you, Joe, and the rest of your team. And, if you ever want to tap into the rest of that, you're always more than welcome to come back to Kenosha to do that.
Absolutely. And I have to say, it's a reminder that our project was not something that, any one person could have done. It was a lot like building a car, right? There's a lot of different people who did different jobs down the line to make this happen. And I'm so thankful that you guys were part of it.
Oh, it's been a lot of fun. It's taken a while, obviously, but like I said at the beginning here, we couldn't have been happier of how everything turned out in the end. Now, a lot of those videos that you're able to digitize, those are available on our YouTube channels. So more and more people are getting access to those and enjoying them, or researching parts of them, or just watching an opera about the gremlin. So
I was going to mention that my favorite of all the things I went through is in 1977, AMC did a new product show for dealers and put on a whole song and dance about that year's products. And the 1977 one survives on a tape, and it's got all these original songs advertising different AMC products: the Gremlin, the Pacer Wagon, the Hornet AMX.
The Gremlin is back and looking great. You'll notice it's taken off some weight. It's shorter now. It's loss of weight. We'll give you great savings, mile for mile.
And we include a few clips in episode number 4. But yeah, you guys have seen it, and the whole thing's on your YouTube channel. It's really fun. And so I didn't tell any of our viewers, go check that out. It's really cool.
AMC is different. It was always different. And I think it shines through in some of that video content. Yeah, if you haven't had a chance, definitely dig into that.
It was a really cool piece of history I was glad to help save. And I think you guys are doing a great job of saving AMC's history and not forgetting to include it's really a people story.
We appreciate that, Joe. And I think, again, it shined through in the documentary as well. We talked to a ton of AMC people this past summer at the homecoming show. And one of the things that we heard all week was the buzz about the documentary and how fairly it was done. That's not always glitz and glamour. There's some kind of, sometimes there's darker moments in AMC's history, but I think the word that I kept hearing over and over again, it was fairly represented.
Well, I'm so glad to hear. I hope it brings lots of people to the Kenosha History Center. Truly a great place, lots of cool exhibits, and I love how the cars are always changing. So definitely I'd recommend people to come see you guys. And of course, I'd like to thank all of our viewers out there for tuning in. Be sure and come back. We've got another podcast episode soon. And of course, if you haven't already, be sure and watch all 6 episodes of The Last Independent Automaker, available now on our YouTube channel and also on the PBS app. It's free to stream. So thank you so much, and we hope to see you again soon.
The Last Independent Automaker podcast was sponsored in part by Visit Detroit, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, Motor City's National Heritage Area, and by the over 375 individuals and organizations who donated to this project. Thank you.